Hello dears, and welcome to my show. I'm your friendly neighborhood librarian, reading the stinkers and praising the masterpieces since 2012. So Hollywood has this thing where they take uncomfortable subject matter from real life and romanticize it like crazy and then pretend they're being so deep and tragic. Like teen pregnancy turns into Juno, rape and murder turns into The Lovely Bones. But by far the most notorious of these morally questionable cash grabs is The Murderer. Fictional murderers come in varying degrees of tastelessness. The sympathetic, sometimes even romantic hero murderer is definitely one of the worst. Then you have the murderers that you're somewhat repulsed by, but still somewhat admire for their cunning and intellect. But one thing we would imagine stays true within all fictional stories dealing with such a sensitive topic. The murderer is always the antagonist, right? Well, actually no. A trend is occurring that puts the murderer firmly in the protagonist seat. These are the characters that we're supposed to root for, sympathize with, relate to. And this isn't a trend that occurs only in visual media. Literature does it too, and it's almost more unsettling to have to read the stark black and white text detailing the inner workings of a sociopath. Often a highly intelligent sociopath at that. But you know what? The reason this keeps occurring in our modern media is not because writers are sick, depraved individuals. Well, mostly. But if the stories didn't sell, they'd cease to be written, because after all, money does make the world go round.
It says the people with the money, make this ever-loving world go round.
So there has to be something a little appealing about putting yourself into the mind of someone bad. Maybe because within each of us there's a hidden madman waiting, lurking, desiring to be fed. Maybe because it makes us feel a little powerful to take a break from our mundane lives and give in to our deepest, darkest selves. And no, I'm not reviewing The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Yet, anyway. I Am Not a Serial Killer by Dan Wells. And now for a basic rundown of the plot. John Wayne Cleaver has possibly the most ironic,
That was so ironic.
yet fitting name of any literary character ever. You see, John is a teenage textbook sociopath. But the thing about John is that even though he doesn't really experience love for people, he strives to stick to societal norms so that he won't go to prison. His family works in the embalming the dead business, so he gets his thrill of handling dead bodies that way, and otherwise lives by a strict, self-inflicted code to ensure that he never gives in to his murderous desires. When another serial killer comes into town and starts offing civilians, John is the only one with the knowledge of serial killer habits and the objective intellect to capture him, or at least try to. That's where our story begins. Before we really get into this, I want to draw your attention to one line in the book that basically defines public perception. Serial killers are real, and their realness is part of what's fascinating, but this is nowhere USA. They're supposed to be real somewhere else, not here. Isn't it a little sad that the majority of people in every city and every town everywhere thinks that? Everyone is always so surprised to find a killer lurking in their midst. John is not actually a serial killer, as the title indicates. He just shows all the classic signs of becoming one, like being obsessed with serial killers, exhibiting animal cruelty, and feeling no emotional attachment to people. Well, those first two are undeniable, but that third one, no emotional attachment, I don't know that that's entirely accurate. See, this book is framed in first person, so it's very open to interpretation. How well does this character know himself? How reliable is our narrator? He's definitely an outside observer looking in as far as society goes, treating humanity as some sort of alien specimen, but who hasn't felt that way sometimes? I mean, that's why we people watch. Or at least, I people watch. That's why we study psychology and sociology. That's why we sometimes feel uncomfortable in parties or other large groups of people. The phrase feeling alone in a crowd was created for a reason. So throughout the novel, I found myself relating to John. His fear of being a monster or being bad is one that I've experienced. Not for the same reason, but... See, I live in the Bible Belt, and I am not religious. And it sucks. It sucks to be different, to have no control over that difference, and to be viewed as reprehensible by society because of that difference. Right, guys?
Build a great, big, large fence, 150 or 100-mile long. Put all the lesbians in there. Fly over and drop some food. Do the same thing with the queers and the homosexuals. And have that fence electrified till they can't get out. Feed them. And you know what? In a few years, they'll die out. Do you know why? They can't reproduce.
So John, despite his difference being that he feels a compulsion to kill people, is an understandable protagonist. And because he at least tries to pretend to be a good person and doesn't actually kill anyone, this isn't as uncomfortable a situation as you might imagine. Besides, I'm not even convinced that he's genuinely bad. Yes, he has a dark sense of humor, but it never crosses a line. It's always genuinely funny. Having been made aware that his fantasies are wrong, he makes sure never to act on them. And actions speak louder than words, or thoughts. It puts us in this interesting place where we start to question what defines character and morality. If someone, for example, truly believes that white people are superior to black people, but doesn't act on this belief and treats black people politely and doesn't commit hate crimes, how bad is it? His racism isn't really affecting anyone. And if this closet racist is a good person in other aspects, is he really a bad person because of this one thought that he doesn't even act on? Humans are complex creatures, and this book demonstrates that. Question time! What do John Wayne Cleaver, the wannabe serial killer, and the Little Mermaid have in common? The answer? Their age. They are both 15-year-old protagonists. I think using the age 15 is no accident in any work of literature. 15 is that uncomfortable age right smack in the middle of teenagerdom. At this point, you're still trying to forge your teenage identity, but you're not quite ready to give up on childhood. 15 is when, little by little, your body, the way you perceive the world, and the way the world perceives you is starting to change. 15 is an age of transition and confusion, so it comes as no surprise to me that Dan Wells chose this as John's age. It's terribly fitting when you consider John's struggles. I've talked so much about John, I feel like I'm not giving the other characters any credit. There is a supporting cast. One thing that I find a lot of books with really compelling main characters have in common is this. The authors tend to neglect the supporting characters. Classics have done it. Wuthering Heights did it, and Pride and Prejudice also did it. Modern books have also done it. Twilight did it, as did The Hunger Games. Sorry to say, but I Am Not a Serial Killer continues this proud tradition. You could say that the characters other than John are so undeveloped and uncharacterized to underscore John's mindset of looking at humanity like pieces of meat, but you could also say it's lazy writing. You see, it never felt like a stylistic choice not to develop any characters. At no point did that even occur to me as a remote possibility, because, to be honest, just being inside John's head and hearing his internal monologue is enough to get us into his mindset. For the sake of mentioning characters that populate this novel, other than the main one, let's proceed. John's mother and her twin sister Margaret are partners in the embalming industry. They are both very concerned for John's sanity. You can't really blame them, but that's pretty much their defining trait. Not much more to that to them. Margaret is more lenient and nicer to John, but then our aunts usually are nicer to us than our mothers, aren't they? They don't have to live with us. What's interesting about all this is that John has an absent father. So, a single mother trying to raise a burgeoning serial killer. You'd think that Dan Wells would examine this angle a little more to fill out the story, but nope! Glossed over! Max is John's friend at school. Really his cover. John doesn't like Max, but puts up with him to look like less of a loner. Nobody really likes Max at school because he's way too loud, he talks about things he knows virtually nothing about, and he just has an all-around irritating personality. Don't we all know people like that?
Nah, I'm right there wrong.
Alvin, yes, you lost the race.
No, I didn't! I'm sorry, I can say all this other bullshit in your script, but he did not lose that race!
Yeah, he did.
No, he didn't!
Hey, congratulations, you got the job.
Hey, that's great. Hooray for life.
Oh yeah, you'll love it. You'll be just like me, only female. Alright, later. Bye. God, I'm awesome.
Max is a loner, John is a loner. Their alliance is the perfect cover. Again, Max is pretty one-dimensional, but John's clinical approach to their relationship is nothing short of fascinating. John has a much older sister who works as the receptionist of the mortuary, named Lauren.
Fucking Lauren, man. What the fuck is Lauren in this book? Just coming in, ruining our protagonist's life. I hate Lauren. Who's Lauren?
Indeed. Dr. Neblin is John's therapist. He's, I don't know, a typical therapist. Not that I've had any experience in therapy or anything. But yes, he's a very calm and understanding presence in John's life, a semblance of consistency, and an excellent place for John to deliver exposition about his past and his desires. Mr. Crowley is an old man who lives across the street. John rakes his leaves for him to give him an excuse to burn them.
Be mine or you will burn.
Pyromania, you know. There's also Brooke. Brooke.
Absolutely flawless.
She's a classmate of John's, totally into him, and guess what? He doesn't have to pretend to want to talk to her. He legitimately does. So, maybe he's not so after all. The first half of the book just deals with John's psyche, his struggles to form relationships, and his day-to-day activities, all the while an unknown killer is terrorizing his town. Second half of this book is where it all goes to crap. It becomes less about psychology and more about a supernatural element that just comes right out of nowhere. There's one intriguing development in the second half, and that is John decides to go all Dexter and decides it's okay to kill other serial killers to get his fix. In the process, though, he becomes a kind of demon slayer. It's like Buffy mixed with supernatural, mixed with Dexter, mixed with stupid. The killer turns out to be a supernatural creature that disguised itself as one of the humans that John actually talks to on a fairly regular basis. The creature is killing people and then taking their body parts to restore its own. So it's not really committing these crimes out of maliciousness or sociopathy. It is instead a tragic figure who wants to stay alive for its loved one who doesn't know its true origins. So our antagonist, who is only revealed in the final act, is a tragic figure of supernatural origin. Why? To what purpose? Why not just make it a human serial killer like it was being built up to in the beginning? Why suddenly throw magic into what has till now been a realistic world. I didn't set out to read a supernatural book, and neither the title nor the back cover blurb prepared the reader for this. There's absolutely no foreshadowing, just bam, suddenly demons and monsters. I wanted to look at human psychology, and what I got was fantasy to wave away the hardest psychological parts. Why? Book, you had so much potential, and then you just wasted it in this total cop-out that has almost nothing to do with the story you started to tell. And why? Why make the killer need to kill to survive? That takes away from this pervading theme of human compulsion to kill despite society and morality. This is no longer a book about a depraved human mind, but a literal monster mind. It's like a vampire book, the tragedy there being that humans turn into monsters who must feed off of humans. But that's a totally fantastical struggle, much different from the real struggle of a human who, biologically speaking, is programmed to need other humans for practical reproductive reasons, but doesn't emotionally need them and wants to murder them. That is compelling because it's real, but this isn't real. Monster needing to take body parts to keep itself youthful and alive and remain with its loved one. The monster is not a human. He's just feeding off another species for sustenance. This is basically turned from the fascinating look into the mind of a serial killer into the mind of someone who kills the cows himself for the burgers he eats. It's very different, and it doesn't work as well as the first part did. Or at all. Would I recommend the book? No. That second half ruined everything. It ruined my experience, it ruined John's character, and the intriguing psychology. It just took everything good about the book and slaughtered it. I can't even recommend reading the first half because then you'll just be angered at all the wasted potential. It was a daring move, and I feel like Dan Wells really wanted to distance himself from Dexter's similar premise. But I'm sorry, this particular way of putting a unique spin on it was not only incredibly disappointing, but a colossal failure. John was great as far as snarky, messed up, but relatable protagonists go. Unfortunately, his character development leveled out unceremoniously near the end, whereas throughout the novel he had been steadily learning more and more new things about himself and the world, and his relationship to the world. Suddenly, even though he's 15 years old and right smack dab in the middle of his story, this book is the first of a trilogy, by the by, it seems like he stops growing. The ending is out of place and doesn't fit the story that preceded it. And all things considered, I really can't give I Am Not a Serial Killer more than 2 stars out of 5, which is a shame because it had an auspicious beginning. I enjoyed the premise, and I had high hopes for this novel. I think that's enough about killers for a while. Next time, a blast from the past as I rediscover a novel that I was assigned in the 5th grade. A novel about solitude and nature and survival, determination and persistence. I am, of course, referring to Scott Odell's Island of the Blue Dolphins. We're gonna see if it still holds up after all these years. Till next time, I'm your friendly neighborhood librarian, signing off.
Asbestos and maybe just a dash of formaldehyde and the habit of decomposing right before your very eyes, along with the people inside.